Welcome to the Lawless Astrology channel. My name is Dabney, and today I have a new astrologer to welcome to the channel. He's actually not a new astrologer. He has been doing this for over 20 years. However, that said, he is new to the Lawless Astrology channel. His name is Dorje Kirsten. Did I say it right, Dorje?
Yeah, you said that right. Thank you. Thank you,
Okay,
Dabney.
perfect. So Dorje and I met at an organization for professional astrologers peer group, and he was selected to do a reading for me, and it just blew me away. It was so poignant. It was so good. I was a hot mess, and he gave me all sorts of good insight. So he is available for readings. So I am going to put all of his information below. He has a relatively new YouTube channel and Substack. So you definitely need to check those things out. Today, what we're going to be talking about is Uranus moving into Gemini. So this is the first of several videos that are going to talk about that because it is a very, very big deal. And we've talked all sorts of astrology about the flipping over of signs. Well, this is the last big one to flip over. And we'll talk a little bit about the timing of that and what we think that that's going to bring to the world. So, one last thing that I need to say. So, first of all, if that's content you're interested in, please do stick around. But one last thing I also want to say is that Dorje does these beautiful snake paintings. And you can see one in the background of his office right there on top of the shelf. And so if you go to his website, you'll see that as well. And they are supposed to ward off kind of bad spirits. They kind of bring good luck to wherever they are hung. And there's a long tradition for this. And Dorje is kind of more of a spiritual astrologer. And so he has studied with Tibetan Buddhist masters, and he has studied this kind of long lineage of this tradition of creating these snake paintings, which you can actually purchase on his website. You can have that created specifically for you. And I think we all could use like a little warding off of the bad juju these days. So I just wanted to get a plug in from that because I was really cool. I thought it was so cool. And if nothing else, just go to his website and read about it. It's very cool. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Welcome, Dorje.
Thank you very much for the great introduction. And yeah, this particular serpent was painted by Kendo Kani, who is the 72nd serpent painting master in this Japanese tradition. They're really amazing because like the Japanese held traditions for so long. And they would go and they would paint these paintings on fishermen docks, in temples, in villages, in order to appease the serpent energy, the dragons, in order to like ward off like sicknesses or earthquakes or floods or tidal waves. And there was a deep, tremendous folk belief in it, but the idea was that they do embody, represent the protective energy of the dragon or the serpent, not the angry energy, but the protective energy. And in that way, they help gather treasure and gather wealth as well as protect from evil spirits. And, who knows whether it's true or not? It's all a question of kind of belief and faith and openness. But at the same time, it's a really neat idea. It's a neat idea that we can have things in our house, that we can have things in our environment that are protective and that remind us of our own, not only basic goodness, but the ability to carry through difficult times, which Uranus moving into Gemini, especially for the United States, has always seemed to indicate that we're moving into perhaps what are going to be difficult times. And I imagine most people on this channel have already have a sense of the difficulties that this nation is moving through.
You are correct. I should do some clarification on my last video. I was kind of jet lagged and I was tired and I was kind of just giving it to people straight like, "Hey, I am a little heartbroken." It was for the Cancer new moon and I was talking about the
Mm.
fact that I think we have to sort of get in touch with our nostalgia and grieve the country that we thought we knew versus maybe the reality. And I was talking about potentially moving, which Dorje was witness to so much of the drama of potentially getting a visa. But I want to assure everybody out there I'm not going anywhere. I'm not moving anytime soon. I may never be moving. So I don't know if I was fully clear on that. I still have a mother, an elderly mother I take care of, and I still have a son who's starting high school. So we're in the exploratory like plan B situation. So that was something I wanted to say. But yes, it has been a very stressful time. But as I have come out of my jet lag and reacclimated to being back here in the US, I'm sort of realizing there is so much reason for hope as well. And that's something that, I want to talk about the potential difficulties, but also I want to zoom out a little bit and recognize that like these difficult times are limited in scope, like they're a number of years, like but there is like I think reason for optimism maybe down the line. And Uranus and Gemini has always brought with it kind of ushered in these big changes. So you want to set the groundwork for what Uranus and Gemini, just what does that mean? Like what is Uranus in Gemini? When is it happening? Do you want to just kind of start and riff a little bit from that standpoint?
So Uranus and Gemini, Uranus is the planet of disruption, change, transformation, revolution. It's also the planet that symbolizes more than any, I think, bringing new things into the world. And for that reason, like Richard Tarnas calls it the Prometheus rather than Uranus. Prometheus, the myth of Prometheus, he stole fire from the gods and he brought it to man. So we find that when Uranus is involved in the transformation or in the cycles of human experience, that new things come into being. And Gemini represents air, it represents technology, it's an air sign, part of the air triplicity. And we do see that, well, we have these drones coming in to the modern world. We have an understanding, a revolution perhaps within drone technology, a revolution within the context of space technology. There's this like trying to get back to the moon, maybe trying to get to Mars. There's these ideas of like auto cars or cars that are able to fly through the air now. I think they're actually being commercially marketed in China. So then there's this air revolution going on, and there's also this technological revolution going on that has to do with artificial intelligence and whether artificial intelligence will move beyond the capacity of humans in its ability to think. And the artificial intelligence industry is very certain that this is going to happen maybe as soon as 1 to 2 years, right when Uranus is entering Gemini. If that happens, it's just going to be spectacular because that will absolutely transform the ability of how humans can tackle large problems, such as designing materials that can travel through space and protect from interstellar radiation, which is one of the big challenges or difficulties of getting to Mars, is the amount of radiation that any astronaut would receive between the Earth and Mars once they're out of the Earth's magnetic field. So then like big problems like that can be tackled, but also small problems like how do you handle, well, big problems actually, like how do you handle the overcarbonization of the atmosphere? How do you handle feeding people? How do you tackle the social problems that do lead to war? And with Gemini, you get like the good and the bad. Like Gemini is symbolized by the twins, it's symbolized by in my mind, like a polarity, a conversation, a dynamic conversation between the best and the worst of any particular individual or situation, or country. And so you can have like artificial intelligence solving a lot of problems that humans face as the best outcome. But you can also have artificial intelligence doing difficult, bad things. Like if it's in charge of the Social Security administration deciding that it's not efficient to have these people on the rolls and just dropping them. And then people have no control or way to get back on them. And so that's a worst case scenario. And we're already kind of seeing a little bit of that percolating up too, especially with the orange tyrants government deciding that it needs to implement artificial intelligence as quickly as possible and just really railroading a lot of what are foundational supportive um, organizations within the government. So it's just a real mix. It's a real bag. It's a revolution. And when you're in the beginning of the revolution or the middle of the revolution, you have no idea how it's going to turn out. And historically, Uranus has always been present in Gemini when the US has been going through revolutions.
Yep. So I'm going to touch on a couple of things that you brought up. One is Prometheus. So we haven't really talked on this channel too much about the mythology of Prometheus, but it's very closely aligned with Uranus. And basically, I'm going to do my drunk history thing because I'm not incredibly eloquent when it comes to talking about mythology, but this mythology is so interesting. So basically, there was the Titans, and the Titans were before the gods, and everything was great. And then all of a sudden, Jupiter told the humans that they couldn't have fire. And Prometheus knew that they needed to have fire in order to, cook and to be warm. And so he defied Jupiter, and he went and he stole fire and gave it to the humans. And then Jupiter was really mad, or Zeus was really mad. And then he ended up punishing Prometheus. So the reason why this is kind of related and interesting in my mind is because I think that there is this sense of like, I can be godlike, right? There is this sense of like, I want like bringing something to humans, that is godlike, because up until that time, the humans had never had fire, and that brought them closer to being like gods. But it wasn't without consequence or punishment. And so as a result, and if you fast forward in the mythology, Zeus got his retribution by sending Pandora's box to Prometheus's brother, and she opened the box and like outflew all of the pestilence and disease and all the things that we didn't have before. So I think that this is a great mythology for this particular, Uranus and Gemini, where it's like, it's going to propel us forward. It is going to make us more quote unquote godlike. There's going to be a whole new level of inventions and discoveries and propelling us forward. However, there might be a lot of unintended consequences unleashed. Would you kind of agree with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's really kind of a great succinct way to talk about the metaphor that with all of these technologies, then there's also unintended consequences. Um, but at the same time, like there's also a lot of benefit that comes from it. Last time, well, when Uranus was in Gemini 2 times ago during the Civil War, then we saw this benefit as a result of the revolution, I mean, of the Civil War, of the emancipation, the amendment of the to get rid of slavery, which was just absolutely spectacular. And so then the 13th Amendment was passed, slavery was abolished. And in that context, a great good came out of it. But during the transition period, it was really, really rough.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that like if you look at whenever Uranus hits Gemini, it's a really, really rough experience for the United States. It happened in 1942, 1943. Again, all kinds of new technologies are invented as a result of the war, but a really, really rough time. Like thousands, hundreds of thousands of men died, sent overseas and died, and experienced horrible trauma that scarred them for generations. Civil War, very, very difficult time. Uranus was also in Gemini in 1774 to 1776, from 1774 to 1782, which was the War for Independence, and also like a very, very difficult time. But out of that was born the nation. Then it was, this is just like amazing to me. It was also in Gemini from 1690 to 1698, which was the King William's War. And this was the war between France, the English, and the Iroquois Federation that started setting up the initial borders of what was to be, the French Canadian area and what was to be the American area. And so you keep going back. And every single time Uranus enters Gemini, there's like this redefinition of what it is to be America, what America's role is in the world, which we're still seeing right now. And also then coming from that is a new way of being that in my mind seems to be more humanitarian and progressive. 1776, there was this like humanitarian movement away from the king, the Declaration of Independence, the writing of the Constitution, the idea that all men are created equally. And sure, it's taken us like 250 years for that to like even be, an idea that we can acknowledge is actually meant to be true rather than just, all white men who own land are created equally, which was where it was right then, but that idea has been built upon, and it's been built upon through this process and cycle of Uranus. And every time it hits Gemini, that cycle brings that idea further to the fore, whether it's the Civil War, whether it's World War II, where the GIs come back and the US government combines the New Deal with the Keynesian economic policies, which are about how the government can intervene and support the economy so all people in the nation can move forward and move into a wealthier standard of living. And now all of that's been under attack recently. But I have a feeling that this movement of Uranus through Gemini this time is going to have a similar kind of shadow or a similar kind of effect, almost a heroic journey where the nation is tossed into darkness and then travels through the valley of the shadows, rediscovers its identity and soul, and comes out even more humanitarian than it was before. But it's an 8-year process, and that 8 years can be challenging. How do you see it playing out?
So there are two videos that I have done in the past. One was about the Uranian cycle. So Uranus comes around back to Gemini around it's an 84-year cycle. So a lot of times when Uranus, we have to look at the previous Uranus and Gemini cycle and then the previous one. So to your point, every time Uranus is in Gemini, the United States has gone to war. Every time we have Uranus in Gemini, it's preceded by Uranus in Taurus. And Uranus in Taurus has to do with security. And it has to do with money. It has to do with the earth and the land and what we value. And Uranus is about change. And so there's been, through each and every one of these Uranus and Taurus cycles, there has been this sense of wanting to isolate, or there's been isolationism, or there's been kind of this unrest that then when Uranus moves into Gemini is fresh new ideas. It's the rising of youth. It is the rebellion. And so suddenly all of this kind of like stuck energy breaks free, right?
Brilliant, brilliant.
Right. So we've been stuck. I think everyone has been feeling on some level like it's Groundhog's Day, right? Like we just can't make progress. We're like slogging through and things just seem to get worse. And, that's been the general zeitgeist, I think, for the past 8 years is like no one feels like the United States has been crushing it. in the past 8 years, right? And so now this is the kind of reason for optimism, I think, is because then once it breaks into Gemini, it's almost like it's broken free from its bonds or its chains, and it's ready to, implement these new ideas. It's very energetic. Uranus in Gemini just seems so frenetic, but it's also genius. It's like a breakthrough. So I kind of feel like this new cycle, this final flipping is the breakthrough, right? It's the breakthrough of what's going to happen. Now, what's interesting is that in the fall through the winter, we're going to have several months where all of these outer planets, except for Pluto and Aquarius, are going to retrograde. So the things like Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, they're going to retrograde back into where they were. And I think there's going to be a revisiting. And so we're just getting a preview right now this summer as Uranus moves into Gemini for the first time in our lifetimes. But then in 2026, when it moves forward, we're going to have a better sense of what this breakthrough is.
Absolutely. And building on that idea, like the understanding of entering into a more humanitarian experience as a nation. After Uranus moves through Gemini, it enters Cancer, the sign of the nurturer and the caretaker. And so it is this like process of kind of getting stuck and then breaking through and then coming back to nurturing and caring for what's really important. And that cycle, it's just brilliant to see that as an entire 24-year cycle that has its own natural rhythm that we all get to witness and partake of and be part of. One of the things that's really unique about it this time, which is also the case in the Civil War, was that Neptune is conjunct the IC of the Sibley chart, of the chart of the founding of America. And so this time and during the Civil War, there's also an identity crisis because the IC is the root of who we are. And with Neptune passing that, then there's this like, who are we? Are we a slave owning nation? Are we a capitalist, corporatist nation that doesn't care for people but only cares for products and productivity that those people create? And so there is this mix going on between Neptune dissolving our own national identity in order for it to reform, and our understanding of who we are as a nation being conjunct the Imam Kolai, the root of the chart, the cusp of the fourth house, which is home, which is family, which is land, and then Uranus then entering Gemini, which is also the revolution of ideas. What do you think of that mixture, Dabney? How do you see that coming together and playing out when you have both of those working at the same time? I know some astrologers are promoting the idea that there will be some kind of civil war in the US. I find that kind of recidivist. I mean, I can see the possibility of it, but I also like to think that, as Obama once stated so eloquently, the arc of history is morally good and it is long. I like to think that we can address this in a different way, that it doesn't require necessarily war. But there certainly is, darkness in the nation as we like deal with immigration in ways that are fairly awful right now.
So to your point, we can't look at everything in a bubble because, you can look at mundane astrology and you can look back at, yes, last time that uh, Uranus was, every time Uranus is in Gemini, we go to war. Okay. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a war of some sort.
Mm.
But that doesn't necessarily mean a civil war. The United States has been at war. I don't know, like, are we ever not at war since World War II on some level? So what I do, look at is the big picture of all the outer planets. And I did a video about the billionaire reckoning. And because I looked at the time of King Henry VIII. And King Henry VIII, when there was Pluto and Aquarius during that time. There was
Mhm.
also Uranus and Gemini and Neptune I believe it was Neptune in Aries too. So it was a similar sort of time frame. If Neptune was not in Aries, I don't have my notes in front of me. I can't remember, but I do know that Uranus was in Gemini. And in that video, I talked a lot about the fact that sometimes these sort of malignant forces and narcissistic personalities are so almost like ordained to be these disruptors to break this. Like they are kind of they're tools of the gods in some way to break the current power structure. And the current power structure is this, financial oligarchs. It's these billionaires. It's the people that are running everything. Now, during King Henry VIII's time, like he was hardly, I feel like he's kind of a character very similar to the character that we have leading us right now, in the sense that he was a malignant narcissist who kind of almost used that narcissism to then change the course of history. And so, he was able to, be the final kind of piece to unseat the power of the Catholic Church by declaring himself, a king that has as much importance and, through the Protestant Reformation and the Protestant Revolution. And then he went and took all of the finances from the Catholic Church in England, and he used that to fund a Royal Navy, which then down the line was part of the reason why the English were able to, steal the money from the Spaniards who stole it from the Mayans and the Incas. So there's sort of this like thing with history where it all connects, but we don't understand what's happening in the moment. And there's these big disruptive times, and we're living in one of these big disruptive times. So with Pluto in Aquarius, I don't think that we are going to become a long-term authoritarian nation. I just don't see that. I do see that we are in for some, bumpy years right now as we sort through what you said, which was like the identity crisis. Like, what is it we want to do? We know it's broken, but how are we going to fix it? And the fixing it in a constructive way is no longer an option. So now that there is a wrecking ball and a bulldozer coming and like destroying everything that we trusted and believed in, which has frankly been going on for years now, if there is no trusted institutions, we are going to have to build back something new. And that's where I'm kind of pulled toward Uranus and Gemini being the unexpected piece where breakthroughs come in. It's not what we think is going to happen. Uranus is never something that you can fully predict, and especially in Gemini. So I think to your point, it's going to be a double-edged sword. It's going to be some good, some bad. There's going to be consequences. And to your point too, like every time we have gone to war, the outcome has been progress.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting that you say the unexpected or the novel or the changing or the transformation, because one of the things that happened during the Civil War, which doesn't really get a lot of notice, is that in Karl Marx was writing his foundational books about the equity of the people and the value of the people versus uh, um, capital. And so that was also one of the Uranus and Gemini occurrences during that time. And it was unexpected, it was novel, it was new, it was this idea that people have as much value as capital, or more so, and that capital shouldn't necessarily rule people. And so it's quite possible that out there right now, as we're facing these challenges, that these novel philosophers, these novel economic theorists, are writing the next new humanitarian idea that's going to come into the world. And it's just going to kind of filter through because nobody knew that was happening in 1846 and 1850. Well, his friends did, but it wasn't something that was like changing the world yet at that point. And, I'm not necessarily in support of the communist form of government or the ideology, but the idea that humans have value in and of themselves, and that value is greater than the capital that they produce, is really quite stark and amazing. And so it's interesting to see how these cycles run together. And Dabney, I really feel like that's one of the great things that astrology can contribute to our understanding of humanity and history is it gives a context for how these cycles repeat. Like you went and you mentioned Henry VIII and how there are similar cycles going on. And that helps us have a little bit of light on the world around us, which otherwise can be overwhelming, it can be confusing, it can be chaotic. And so, one of the amazing things about astrology is it's not only helping shed light on our own personality, on our own habits, on our own path forward, on our own narrative and timeline based on the transits and the progressions and the solar arc directions that we might be experiencing, but it's also gives us the ability to contextualize where we are as people in the context of history by showing us these cycles that we're fortunate enough to be born into and then facing them in the sense of, well, they're terrifying. Like right now it's a terrifying moment in America, but to me, I know there's some people who are really jazzed about it, but to me it's like really terrifying. And to give it to that context and to say like, well, there is light at the other side of the tunnel. We've been through this journey before as a species, as people who live under the sway of oligarchic powers and governance. And we've come through it, and we've come through it better in the end. And the moral arc of humanity has continued to steadily move forward. If Uranus and Gemini and Neptune conjunct the IC is leading to a civil war, which I don't think it is, but on a legal level and on a mem level, we're already there. So maybe the moral arc of history is that the Civil War is fought with lawyers and mems this
Right.
time around, which is awesome. And that would be very Neptune in Aries, this kind of like this mem thing. And which makes me kind of like wonder, and then this is a question I have for you, and I have my own kind of resonance with it, which is when people are moving into a time that is historically very opaque, uncertain, a little bit scary. And in their own personal charts, you have Saturn moving into Aries and Neptune moving into Aries and Uranus moving into Gemini, Pluto moving into Aquarius, Jupiter moving into Cancer. That's five planets all entering a new sign this year. Well, Jupiter enters a new sign every year, so we can kind of excuse that one. But, all the outer ones moving into a new sign, that's not just disrupting our society. We're all facing disruption towards the habits that we're comfortable with. Long-term ways that those planets being stable and aside for 8 years in the case of Uranus, for 16 years or for 20 years in the case of Neptune or in the case of Pluto. Those are long habits or ways of being that our souls have grown accustomed to that we're being called to disrupt right now, that we're being called to look at things from a fresh, new perspective. So how do you advise people to work with, say, Neptune and Aries, Neptune and Saturn moving into Aries?
I've been asked to do a Neptune and Aries through the houses, and I think I'm going to
Oh,
do
excellent.
so. But I do think that there is something to be said about the fact that there are such big destiny changing transits happening right now that the best thing that we can do is live in our integrity and to live out our own personal charts, like to move towards our north node. As you know, I'm an evolutionary astrologer, and so embodying your special gift is going to help pull all of society forward, right? It's the fear, it's getting stuck, it's the paralyzation toward your south node personally that is the challenge, that is the repetition. And that's what we want to break free from during this, because this is like, okay, the repetition needs to end. This is big times of change. Change especially for people who have certain planetary energy in their chart, like Cancer or Taurus. They don't like change, right? So it can be sort of jarring or unsettling. But you mentioned something, and I would love you to talk a little bit about the heroic journey or the hero's journey, because I think this moment in time for each and every individual person and everyone that is coming to me as a client, which I'm not taking readings right now, but I'm going to open it up soon. The point being, Dorje does have openings, everyone. So if you want a very spiritual reading, please go to Dorje. The heroic journey, I think, is what we are embarking upon. It's kind of like we are in our own version of Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, where it's like we are given this opportunity now to see what we are worth. Like when you are stripped bare, all the Neptune and Saturn and Aries is saying like, okay, strip away what is not needed. Like you are what is needed. You're like, what's important to you? What is it that you were put on this earth to do? And what is your unique gift that you can then express? And how are you going to do that through these trials and tribulations when we've got, he who shall not be named, and we've got, Sauron, and we've got Darth Vader? Like, this is the heroic journey. I mean, that's why it was so popular, because this is something that throughout mythology, the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell has been talking to people about this, or informing people for forever. So you want to talk about your version or your interpretation of the heroic journey and how that plays into today's astrological zeitgeist?
Absolutely. And I was thinking about this, falling asleep the other night, in terms of how our experience through the astrology chart, through astrology, is the guide through the heroic journey. Because the heroic journey is like we're all facing moments of darkness where we lose our sense of self because of phenomena that happens to us from the outer world that we experience. And there may be correlations with our own inner world that causes that. Perhaps it's not relating to or living up to our soul's potential. And then we're called to live up to our soul's potential. And the North Node, the placement of Pluto, as well as all the other planets and how they contribute to the arc of the story, is the story of how to live into the full potential of our soul. And as we personally go through the various cycles that we might find in the astrology chart, such as the cycles of Mercury, the cycles all the way up to the cycles of Pluto, which none of us will probably live a full cycle Pluto unless AI really knocks out aging, which, it's possible. It's possible.
Uranus
But
and Gemini, you never know.
Uranus and Gemini, you never know. Yeah. But the quality of living through the solar return cycles that we experience, through the Saturn cycles, through the Venus star point cycles, the cycles of Mars and its retrograde taking 2.2 years, Jupiter changing signs every year, the Jupiter returns and how they expand our experience as individuals and then collapse them into themselves. All of those are heroic journey cycles where we face our own soul changing and transforming our lives. And we experience fear about that transformation. And we walk into the valley of darkness unprepared for what is to come, except for our own virtue. And as we walk towards the new goal that we envision, we don't necessarily know the end point. I remember Bernadette Brady, she'd be like, if you're having a Neptune transit, all you can do is visualize what's going to come next, because that gives you that place where you know the ship may land and helps you through that uncertainty that that transit has. And again, that's a heroic journey, leaving on the ship, sailing across the ocean through the mist, facing the monsters that arise, slaying them with your integrity and truth, and then getting to the far shore. And so there's this constant cycle of having the ground underneath us taken, rising up into what our soul's calling is, and then accomplishing the leveling up of our own being and coming into the wholeness of our soul in a more integrative way. And the amazing thing about astrology is the astrology chart itself shows that path. It shows not only the habits that hold us back from engaging in the world completely, but also the result and the fruition of our soul when we fully engage in the world. And this has been known since the beginning of astrology, really. If you go back and you look at um, the if you look at the Greek magical papyri and the stories that they tell and the methods that they tell of Poimandres talking about how to walk the path towards being whole again, towards being one with the all good, the nous that is the nature of the goodness of the universe. It is through going through each planet and reclaiming the virtue of that planet that one ascends towards one's whole soul. And so the art of astrology has been for 3,000 years, partly about how we become whole beings again. And so, in the context of like modern current astrology, like one thing I look at is like, well, Neptune's been in Pisces for the last 12, 14 years, roughly around there. Don't remember exactly right
Yeah,
now.
with the
Please forgive
retrogrades and
me.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a 14-year cycle, but that's because of retrogrades and
retrogrades. Yeah,
big picture over
big
a
picture. And so in Pisces, then it's embodying the collective. And what happened during that time is we all got lost into the collective through social media. And so the soul's journey, the hero's journey at that point was to walk into the collective and lose our definition of boundaries by having all of our minds become blended with each other through social media, as Neptune was in Pisces. And now Neptune's moving into Aries, and that's a movement into ourself. And so one of the things that like I really encourage clients to do is how are you going to start finding your own inner soul, your own inner self, by using the power of Saturn in Aries and Neptune in Aries, disconnecting from the social sphere, putting down the cell phone, putting time limits on your social wandering, which drives us all crazy. I mean, you
it's
tap
toxic.
into it and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm crazy. You might be having a really nice time at home, drinking a glass of wine, hanging out with your husband and your kids, or your wife and your kids. It's totally okay. And then you look on Twitter or X or Blue Sky or Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and suddenly you're like completely flipping. It happens to me daily, because I'm still working on, oh, Neptune and Saturn and Aries is about creating boundaries with the universal human mind and centering into my own soul again. And so these cycles, they speak to the hero's journey and how we walk through them. And they also guide us into what the appropriate step is during any portion of our life.
Beautiful. I love that. I love that. And I think during Neptune in Pisces, there was a lot of dystopian fantasies, a lot of dystopian nightmares. And I see that with this current batch of tech oligarchs that they kind of lost their minds. These people leading the way with AI, because it went from social media and now it's artificial intelligence. And I do believe that Uranus and Gemini will be largely about artificial intelligence. But these guys are like building bunkers. These guys are preparing for the end of the earth. They're trying to like get us to colonize Mars, which will never happen, like, because that makes no sense. Because I think that so much of their power and the rise of these tech oligarchs came in during Neptune and Pisces. And now Neptune's in Aries. And so in some ways there's kind of this call to arms, which can be, it doesn't always have to be bad. It can, a call to arms sometimes is a call back to integrity. It's a call back to like protecting what is valuable to us, and our sanity might be valuable to us. So there is this sort of dystopian AI vision out there But that doesn't have to be what happens if we control it, if we recognize that we are still in control of ourselves and our use of technology, because technology is still a tool. And so with Uranus and Gemini, I think there will be these giant breakthroughs, because we've had these breakthroughs in the past with, the Industrial Revolution, and Uranus and Gemini was when the printing press came out. So there's just always been these giant inventions that have changed society. And when that happens, everybody swears to God it's the end of the world. Like everyone thinks that their lives are going to be turned to crap, and like we can't do this and we have to stop this, and that it's the end of the world. And so it's interesting to me to see these people who are the ones who are bringing this technology into the forefront being the ones who are also so terrified of it, but also saying that we can't do anything about it because we don't want to be regulated. So, I think there is a call to arms to some degree for us as the people impacted to say, no, you do have to regulate it. It needs to be something that is positive for society, not destructive for society. And that can be harnessed in that way. And I think that's also a movement with Uranus and Gemini, where hopefully we get people, youth, you know,
Mm.
new leaders, with all this Aries too, new leaders. We're starting to see like what just happened in New York City. I just think I don't see us picking up arms against our neighbors. I think we've been in a bit of a civil war, and I don't think that it's going to be settled out anytime soon. But I do think that these giant breakthroughs that are happening, it's all such dynamic energy. And I think we're going to have a better understanding of things in 2026.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. And the amazing part of that is that it brings hope to the heart. Like, because again, that's the brilliance of astrology is it shows you, oh, this is the worst that can happen. Like, oh, last time this happened, bloody civil war. The last time Neptune and Uranus were in these signs. But it doesn't have to be. Like it all depends upon us. And it depends upon our ability also to have positive thoughts and aspirations and prayers, because we live in the noosphere. We live in all of the collective thoughts of humanity. And the more that we put out positive energy ourselves, positive thoughts ourselves, like a drop, then that affects the way that the whole is experienced. And so we have the power. We have the power.
And I do think if we end up going to war, I don't think it will be within our own country. And in some ways,
Mm,
I think it will probably bring our country back together. Um,
yeah.
common
Yeah.
enemy. I actually don't think we're going to be living under this regime for, the next 50 years or anything like that. And, fascism in the 30s came up under Uranus and Taurus very much,
Wow. Yeah.
right? So Uranus in Gemini, you know,
Disassembled it.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and they didn't have the language or the knowledge of what is fascism or how these things happen. They didn't have Heather Cox Richardson talking to them on a computer screen about the dangers of authoritarian rule, So there is kind of this sense that there are a lot of us out there that do care, and we are very knowledgeable. And so I just think the Uranus piece is the wild card. And
Uh-huh.
I'm not I'm not willing to say like, oh, we're doomed, right? I think that there's a lot of potential on the horizon for some really exciting, great things. And I don't want to sugarcoat things and say that what is currently happening isn't currently happening and that it isn't stressful, because it is stressful. So I think that you and I are in the same boat with this, which is like, we have to look at this realistically. There are these cycles. It might be a challenging few years, but it doesn't mean that the end of the story is written.
Yeah, absolutely. And connect to disconnecting from the collective meme consciousness of social media into your own family, into your own mind, into your own heart, into your own community. And by doing that, then you're moving it forward in a positive way. And I feel like that's very strongly part of what the message of Uranus and Gemini is like have these conversations. Neptune and Saturn and Aries, it's like disconnect from the collective and connect to your own heart and your own family, your own your own soul, your own community, and bring forth ideas of goodness and how to care for one another. And that's going to be really, really beautiful. Another thing that's interesting about what you said in terms of fascism and it coming and building up into World War II and then disassembling is that's also what happened when Pluto entered Aquarius in 1774, 1776, is authoritarianism was reaching a peak.
Mhm.
And then what happened was as Pluto moved through Aquarius, that was disassembled through the American Revolutionary War and through the French Revolutionary War. And so in astrology, as we know who when we study it, if you start seeing stacks of things, stacks of planetary cycles that confirm each other, you know that's more likely to happen. And so I agree with you 100%, Dabney. We're in the disassembling phase now. Pluto in Capricorn was the consolidation of power in the authority figure. Well, Capricorn authority figure. Pluto power, the consolidation of it. And now, as it moves into Aquarius, it's the disassembly of that and the distribution of power into the humanitarian principle. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely love
Amazing. So this is the last thing I want to leave everyone with is the Uranian return. The reason why the US always goes cuckoo and goes to war during, and I wouldn't even say it's cuckoo, it's just they get energized to fix things or change things or have a new way of being when Uranus is in Gemini, is our Uranus is in the sixth house of the people.
it. Hmm.
And so we have to understand that both with Pluto and Aquarius and the Uranus return, there is a return to power to the people. We may not be seeing that yet, but you have to understand we are literally in the previews of the movie. Like we are just getting the hints of things. And all of that old guard energy, other than Pluto, is going to retrograde. It's going to go back and like kind of we have some cleanup to do before we can really go forward. And I think in 2026 is when it's game on. And we're just getting kind of a taste of what's to come. But there is no full way to predict what's happening. But I'm really empowered by the fact that we had no king's protests that were the largest protests in the United States history. Now, you wouldn't have known that by watching the coverage of it, right? Even the Women's March got so much more coverage, and it just goes to show how much the media has they have disassembled. But you do know it if you go to alternative sources like YouTube and Substack and people who are really kind of out there trying to get the truth out there. So this is the year of the snake. And so everybody who would like one of Dorje's paintings needs to go check out his serpent paintings. And if you don't buy one, at least read about them because I read about it today for the first time and I was like, that is so interesting and so cool. And Dorje has a very powerful spiritual lineage that he has studied Tibetan Buddhism. He studied under masters. So he has a very calming, heart-centered approach to astrology. He mixes a lot of different traditional and Hellenistic and now some evolutionary. And so he is an excellent person to get a reading from right now if you're looking for that kind of grounding and more heart-centered astrology. And that's why isn't your website heart, what is your website? It's
Heartastrology.com. Yeah.
heartastrology.com. So
That's it. Yep. Thank you, Debbie.
yeah,
Thank you,
this has
Dabney.
been a really fun talk. Anytime that I get to talk about the hero's journey with somebody and, tech oligarchs and it's just so juicy to me.
And a grand, broad view. I mean, I just really appreciated all of the different areas that you brought into the conversation. And it's one of the reasons why your channel is so amazing. It's because you have such a broad spectrum of guests as well as topics, and you really give a richness to the art of astrology. Thank you so much for having it and hosting it.
Oh, thanks, Dorje. All right, everyone, go subscribe to his channel. Check out his website. As always, there is a reason and a season for it all, and the universe is conspiring to help us. Keep the faith, people. Turbulent times, part of the hero's journey. All right, till next time, stargazers.